Are we overusing the label of narcissist and narcissism? How come it's become so popular to say that everybody is a narcissist or to say that everybody has been narcissistically abused? So today, I want to tackle that. I want to talk about why there's this frequent upsurge of narcissistic abuse and what actually is it? How do we know the difference between narcissistic abuse and maybe other forms of abuse? Why are we labeling everybody as a narcissist? What is actually going on behind the scene on that? Um, and I also want to get into a definition of the fact that narcissistic abuse isn't just exclusive to narcissists. I know that's a common philosophy that because it says it's narcissistic abuse, it somehow is tied into the DSM-5 that you have to be a narcissist in order for you to be diagnosed with that. So if you've noticed, it's in fact I'm surprised that it hasn't become the word of the year. And gaslighting was the word of the year in 2022. I'm surprised that we haven't moved to it becoming the word of the year for 2024 or 2025. But it seems that it's become super popular to label anybody who is difficult or problematic or any broken relationship or any type of abuse as though we have been narcissistically abused. And so let's talk about what actually is it. Why are we using this terminology a lot? What's happened recently for it to become such a popular cultural phenomena? And what really is abuse? What is fair to call that? So I never heard of the terminology. Let me back up and give a little history. I've never heard of the terminology until I was actually finished writing the book Love You More. So if any of you guys have read my memoir, The Story, I knew that when I met my second husband after I was widowed, I knew that he was narcissistic. I mean, I was a psychologist. I was knew the DSM-5 really well. It was a frequent topic in graduate school, which I know is rare, is that I had a really solid education on narcissistic personality disorder, had classes on the topic, classes on personality disorders. So I wasn't surprised that he had I wasn't surprised that he had toxic traits. But what I didn't realize, because we hadn't been talking about it, was that the toxic traits had implications for relationships. That people who are narcissistic or have narcissistic personality traits, and I would actually say that a lot of those in the cluster B personality grouping. See, the DSM-5, it lists, I believe it's 10 personality types, and they're grouped by class A or type A, type B, and type C. And type B makes up the group that includes narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, borderline personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. That makes up type B. So when we talk about, oh, thank you so much for that gift. When we talk about cluster B, we're talking about that group of the DSM-5 personality disorders. I knew that meant he was grandiose. I knew that he probably would have issues of superiority. I wasn't surprised that this person was shame aversive, that he struggled to be empathic. And, I thought that it was culpable. I just thought, I mean, nobody had warned me that this was going to be detrimental to me. I didn't realize, I never, like I said, narcissistic abuse in 2016 wasn't the thing. We weren't talking about it. So it wasn't until I got all done and I was writing the story, and I started writing in 2019, finished it and published it, the book. I'm trying to see if I have a copy of it right here in front of me. I published the book in 2022. So February 14th, because of Love You More. And he had this big thing about, competing about who loved who more, that I wanted to make it on a Valentine's Day. I thought, what an ironic way to sort of celebrate this release of this book. So it was when I was releasing the book that I started to get on social media. That's where I first heard it. I would be curious about the rest of you. Where did you first hear of the terminology of narcissistic abuse? For me, it probably was TikTok, to be honest with you, that I first heard of this. But I would be curious to see where you guys heard it. Was it on YouTube, or did you hear it on Facebook, or was it on TikTok? Oh, Jules said hers was the first time she'd ever heard of it in court. That's really intriguing. But that was the first time I heard of it. I had already come across the material on trauma bonding from Patrick Carnes' work. He called it a betrayal bond. I was aware that there's a Stockholm syndrome likeness to this behavior, in which there was you become brainwashed and groomed. We often right now use the word groomed as a way to describe it, but really it's a form of brainwashing technique. That I knew that there was yeah, that there was certainly a lot of deception in my relationship with my ex. There was a lot of gaslighting in my ex, but I hadn't heard of narcissistic abuse. So I would have to say I probably heard of it roughly around from 2021, and that's when I officially got on. I got on the platform was around 2021. I started watching it in 2020. You know, like a lot of us during the pandemic with a lot of time on our hands, but I started posting for the first time, I think it was February in 2021. And I would say that was when I started coming across people like Lee Hammock and Cynthia, which is called Sinful. I also met Stronger Than Before. Those are the big names that I met right off the bat when I was on that platform. And I'll tell you, when I started hearing their story and hearing what they were describing versus what I had experienced, it was like shocking. It is lagging for you guys. I'm going to correct that. It was really shocking for me. Sorry, I've got another problem. I forgot to switch off my cellular plan on poor TikTok people. So it should be better for you guys. I just switched over to the better Wi-Fi. So yeah. That was the first I started hearing was the OGs of this arena talking about narcissistic abuse. And when I started hearing the deception, the creation of a false persona, the promises of getting help, and yet the repeated betrayals, the way that in fact there's this idealization initially and then the devaluation only to get discarded, you know, this whole process, and then the hoovering. When you guys start describing how one of the things I remember thinking I was shocked when I heard it was my ex said to me, I know you really needed closure. He actually used that word. He said, I know you really need closure. Why don't we meet and I explain what happened to you? And I'm thinking, oh, this is music to my ears. Of course I want closure. Of course I want to understand what happened. We get together and it becomes a pitch for him wanting more money from me. He wanted a better settlement. He never gave me, there was no explanation that came. And then when I shared that, I started to discover all of you had something similar. You experienced that same kind of bait and switch, like they dangle something out there that they promise you that you really want to hear. Maybe they're going to explain what really happened on that Friday night when they stonewalled you, or maybe you think finally they're going to, explain why they walked out on you, or whatever it is, and then you get there and you discover no, it was actually just literally a hook. They were fishing, and it was a hook that was a bait. You took the bait, and now they want to ask you for something that's to their benefit, not to yours. So it was really shocking to me to discover this that I joined a community, that I had joined a community of survivors, and that their stories, or even like I posted a video a while back about how narcissists treat their phones. You know, the weird behaviors they have on the phones. Like one of them is my ex would send me a photo every few days, or especially when we were having a big, like something traumatic, we were having a fight, he would send me a photo of, you remember this, or I really love this girl, or whatever like that. And some of you say your partners shared music. You know, they'd send you a music, or they'd send you some kind of, memorabilia or something that kind of tugs at the heartstrings. And I remember when I put that out there, and all these like, yeah, me too, me too, me too. And I'm thinking, oh my goodness, it was so shocking to me that this is such a universal experience for those of us who experience this kind of abuse. So what is really going on? Why is this big surge of interest in narcissistic abuse? When is it an overuse? When is it a proper use? What is actually narcissistic abuse? What is actually a narcissist? What is a narcissistic personality disorder? We're going to get into all of that. So I'm so excited that you're here today with me. I'm Dr. Kerry Kerr McAvoy. I'm a retired psychologist. I have over 20 years of counseling experience. I'm just thrilled that you're here hanging out with me and we're talking about this topic. So let's start off by talking about what is a narcissist. What technically is a narcissistic personality disorder? I think before we even get any further to what is abuse, narcissistic abuse, let's first talk about what constitutes a narcissistic personality disorder. So I've been reading for my Toxic Free Relationship Club, which is a private membership where we support each other. We meet weekly for group coaching. As I'm preparing for our book club, because we're reading Dr. Robert Greene's book called The Law of Human Nature, we're on chapter 4, and he talks about how character is formed. And I really love the way he stated it, because it's so beneficial to view it from this standpoint, because the common question people have is, why can't they change? And when you don't understand how a person is constructed, you don't understand why change is so difficult for someone who has NPD. So I want to start there, and then I also want to get into the DSM-5 criteria. When you hear the word personality disorder, you're talking about a character, your essential, the makeup of who you are. There are things that we believe that are kind of genetically hardwired into a person. For example, if you're an introvert or an extrovert or an ambivert, that's been hardwired, baked into your personality. You are kind of naturally a person who thrives on social interactions and being out and about. That's an extrovert. Or you're a person who thrives on the quiet, the solitude, and not being shy. Introversion isn't about shyness, it's about finding peacefulness or less stimulation, like social stimulation, more energizing than really being around a lot of people. So it's just a kind of a different way the brain works, and you're kind of hardwired that way. You're either extroverted or you're introverted. You're also a person who has a certain measure of impulsivity. You may be somebody who really hates to push that button, whatever it is. Maybe you're the one that's really reluctant to take a new job or to leave a job, really reluctant to make a purchase. Maybe you're a person who just, you think and think, and even when you like buy a gift for somebody, you take a lot of time processing that. You're pretty slow to make a quick decision. Then there are other people, they see it, they feel it, and they want it. They're a little more impulsive. They're a little more driven by what their instincts, a little more driven by their sensory experience of something, their feelings of something. All of this is hardwired into a person, and they're born that way. You can see it in infancy. Anybody who's been a mom and has had more than one kid, you'll have one kid that the minute someone shuts the door across the whole house, that baby, I swear, hears it, and they're pop wide awake. You'll have another baby that could sleep through a hurricane, seriously, just like there's nothing that moves that infant. You may have somebody else that was really a great eater and was really easy to soothe. I mean, it was rarely cried, was just super, easy temperamental. And then you have another one who just everything was hard and it melted down about all things. And again, this is hardwired into a personality. It's just the way that people are kind of made and built. Well, that's true for narcissists. They don't actually have the particular genetic codes that they can say makes this up, but they believe there's a predisposition to narcissism. And so some of us probably have a set of genetic markers that make us more vulnerable, and some of us don't. But you have a character. Maybe you have the character of being very self-focused. Maybe your character has a hard time relating to other people. You just don't connect well. You don't get what other people are going through. You're very preoccupied with yourself. Maybe you have a character of impulsivity. Narcissists probably have these innate they're like baked into their personality characteristics that make them think really highly of themselves and make them kind of like not sensitive to other people. And they're not very good at managing their own emotions. They're probably a little like when something happens, they easily react. So think of these things as being part of that character. That's the first like basic level. That's your bent. When you are whatever you want to do as a reaction, you're going to lean into your personality style. You can break your personality style. I can go out, and those of you who've met me in public would say, Gary, you're not an introvert. You act very extroverted. You're very outgoing. But you know what? You don't see me back in the house afterwards crashing with a big headache, reacting for the fact that I pushed myself for an hour. So you don't know that I'm actually making myself do that. I'm going against my natural grain, and there's going to be a cost for that. So that will give you an example. So just like that, narcissists can also push against their bent to be self-preoccupied and egocentric, or they're bent to be arrogant. They can put on a facade and act really sensitive, but their main preoccupation, though, is going to be themselves ultimately. They'll get tired and they'll revert back to themselves. So That's the first layer. The second layer of development that really affects our sense of self is what happens in that attachment with that primary caregiver. And there's a lot that can go wrong. It's not just simply about having a secure attachment versus an anxious or avoidant or disorganized. It's literally what happens between that caregiver that helps build that person's sense of trust, that baby's sense of safety, and the baby's sense of it's viewed as self is worthy and lovable and acceptable, and can get its needs met. All there's a whole bunch of variables that happen. It's not a simple thing. It's like what happens in the family, how available is that parent, is the match between parent infant a good one. So all of these things create a baseline for how each of us see the world, and that becomes your personality. These essential experiences make you a person who believes things work out good for others, who makes you optimistic and sees the glass half full, or maybe it makes you a little more reserved and cautious. Maybe it makes you shy, or maybe for someone else it may make you really slow to take action. Maybe somebody else it might make them very impulsive. But all these things kind of factor in. So here's why, despite the fact that you say you want to be different, like every year you make these New Year's resolution that then you just can't fulfill it, is because these qualities of you, these hard-baked personality traits of yourself, always get active. They're very easily activated because it's been who you are from the get-go. And so same with narcissists. It's part of who they've been from the get-go. It's easily activated, and that's why we tend to be who we are. We tend to repeat similar decisions. If you're a person, for example, who's really determined, you're a go-getter. And even as maybe a teenager, you won competitions because you were the one that was out there every day training for hours and hours and hours. And say something terrible happens to you as an adult, you're probably likely to recover because you have the innate personality traits to be determined, to set goals, and to see it through despite really great hardships. On the other hand, if you're somebody who kind of procrastinates, you really hate working too hard, you just wish somebody would kind of make it easy for you, and you tend to react impulsively as a child, you probably as an adult are still having the same issues. It probably shows up at work that way. It probably happens in your relationships. And even though you may say, oh, I need to stop doing that, chances are you keep still doing it because it's an expression of you. So the third layer that Dr. Green talks about in this book, The Law of Human Nature, is what happens in our adult experiences. Now, those can modify us. I can tell you as a person who has been widowed, and also who's been in a very toxic relationship, surviving one. Yeah, I am different today than I was 9 years ago, absolutely. But am I profoundly different? Is my introverted nature, who's pretty determined personality, profoundly changed? Am I now no longer introverted and not a determined person? No, absolutely not. I still am. I'm still very determined. I'm still very introverted. But I may have gained some confidence, and I may have made some sense of things in my life, but I'm still, my basic core is myself. So that's a long answer to say the same for the narcissist. That I really think it's important for us to understand that, because when we get hopeful, because they're very good at telling us what we want to hear, that's one of their mechanisms. For them to keep people in their lives, they have learned to tell people what they want to hear. They're very, very good, and they do it with bravado. They do it with with their whole chest. They'll say it with their whole chest, and you'll think, oh, they mean it. See, there's such sincerity here. There's such vulnerability there. No, it means they don't want you to leave, and they know what you need to hear. They want to keep you captive in this relationship. And chances are, if you really look at their behavior over a long amount of time, you'll see that nothing actually has changed. The behavior still is consistent despite what you're hearing. So let's talk about what actually is a narcissistic personality disorder. A narcissistic personality disorder has to have 5 of the 9 criteria on the DSM-5. Now, it's always an interesting. Someone just said to me on YouTube, I don't believe in the DSM-5. I just don't think there's biological markers. Well, this has been studied for a long period of time. The narcissistic personality disorder first made its appearance in the DSM it was DSM-3 in 1980, and prior to that, I'm sure it was. I mean, we have studies going way back to the 30s and 40s on it. So there's been a lot of like observation, theorizing, trying to understand exactly this personality type. But here are the 9 criterion that they settled on that make up a narcissistic personality disorder, and you have to have 5 of these. And now remember, I'm saying they're baked in qualities of an individual, meaning that this is this is part of their personality. This is part of their character. And they are a grandiose sense of self-importance, a preoccupation with fantasies of unlimited success or achievements or beauty or being somehow the ideal person or the ideal worker or something like that. Number 3 is a belief that they're special and unique and that they should only be in a relationship with other special and unique people, that they're difficult to understand by the average person. In other words, they're superhuman and need to hang around with other superhuman people. So if we think of this as the Marvel Club, they would need to be hanging out at that headquarters with other superpowers or superheroes because they consider themselves extra special. The next one is they have an excessive need for admiration, and they also are very entitled. They believe they're owed, that life should give them what they need because of this extra specialness or because of their hardship or because of their who they are or what they've gone through. They have this great sense of entitlement to that they should go first in line all the time. They really believe in this kind of this superness of themselves. They tend to be interpersonally exploitive, which makes sense if you think about it. If you think you're superior, you belong in the superior club, you then should have special treatment because of the superiority. Then you're also then going to exploit other people in order to get it because, see, you deserve it. You're that person, you're that special, then it should come your way. They have a lack of empathy and self-reflection. We talk a lot about that. They don't really have a sense of what other people are going through. They don't get when you talk about the fact that maybe you've got a sore tooth. They even though they've had a sore tooth and maybe even a root canal, they can't relate to. All they think about is their experience. They don't care about your experience, and they don't care that your experience is problematic. So all they see is themselves. So when they're sick, they're the only sick person. When you're sick, you're not that sick. When life goes wrong and they have they lose a job, it's catastrophic. But when you lose a job, well, that's just another day in the month. And why are you making a big deal about it? Their holidays, their birthdays, although they really actually do a whole lot to mess them up because they don't like other people getting a focus. But when it's special for them, then it's super special. But when it's for you, you're just making a whole lot of big deal about nothing. So it's this lack of awareness and empathy and concern and sympathy for you and what's yours and what you're going through. And then there is this envy, and that's kind of one of the root bases when you think about it. Envy is again related into what deserved. So when they look at your life and they see what you have, that really great job that you've worked super hard, that you've been promoted 3 times, that you've given up several of your weekends in order for you to have that job, they look at all of that and they say, you don't deserve that. I deserve it just for being me. You don't deserve it because you're not me. It's not that you're not good, but you're not me. So everything kind of rotates around this they don't like you having anything. And somebody's talking about how their ex doesn't pay child support. Of course your ex doesn't pay child support. That your ex would say, you don't deserve that child support. You're impinging on this person's lifestyle. What did you do to deserve to have that child? Okay, granted, you're raising the kids, but they'll even underestimate how much it costs to raise a kid, or that they'll claim that you're using that money somehow in a I can't say that word, frivolous, I won't even try, you know what I mean, that some silly way in order to benefit yourself, not because it actually costs you that much to raise a kid. So this is really odd, myopic, self-centered, crass, it feels like callous perspective of seeing the world. And it's based on envy. And if you really think about it, they're resentful of your accomplishments. They're resentful of you having. My ex actually said when we broke up, We had a one round of separations, and before the second time it stuck. But in the first round, he said to me when he was asking for a big payout from me, and remember, my payout came from life insurance from my husband dying of cancer. This is what he said to me. Life's never been fair to me, talking about himself. Why should it be fair to you? Meaning he wanted half of that life insurance policy because he considered it unfair that I had that. Now, even that, let's even, we pause on that, the ridiculousness of that. He's failing to take into account that my husband and I made a smart decision to have life insurance, that we worked hard to get where we were at, and then he died of cancer. And my whole life imploded with that death. And that's how I came to have any of the money, which partly is a legacy for my kids. You know what I'm saying? It's unfair for me to have that money, that cash. It's unfair. It just makes no sense. And you'll find that. You'll find that they whatever they say, it literally like doesn't compute because it's rooted on envy. It's completely rooted on this really weird worldview. And then there's last one is they act haughty. They act arrogant, they act haughty. You'll see it in the way that they treat others. Really watch what they do with subordinates. How do they treat the underlings at work? How do they treat the cashier at the grocery store when no one's looking and things are going wrong? What do they do to the kids in the house or the dog in the house when things aren't going their way? How do they treat their partner after the relationship has gotten old and it's no longer exciting and new? Those are the times you're gonna see the person's true colors is how they treat those around them that have less power than them. And it's always, of course, it's they'll either make a scene in public because they feel outraged and they're entitled, or they won't make a scene because they need a great reputation. But the minute you get in the car, man, they're going to give it to you. Like if you ever go to a therapy session with them and you actually bring up a real topic that's truly bothersome and that person thought you shouldn't have, ooh, will you hear about it all the way home? So that's an example of haughty, arrogant behavior. Okay, in order to be diagnosed as a narcissist, you need to have 5 of the 9 criteria that I just listed. 5 of them, which I bet you a lot of you listening said, oh yeah, I ticked off more than 5. It was pretty easy to hit that. That's a narcissistic personality disorder, and it is on a spectrum from mild symptoms to very severe symptoms. And there's also different types of them. They're malignant, the hero or communal type. Then there's the covert, which is really called vulnerable narcissists, but we tend to refer to them on social media as the covert narcissist. You'll have the grandiose or the more overt narcissist. And then there's also the somatic, or sometimes referred to as the sexual. It's not always, somatic means body, like physical body. So you might see it in the excessive concern of how the body looks and excessive concern of how the body experiences life, but it also can mean those who are excessively concerned with the health of their body, even those who have a lot of sicknesses. It can also show up like that. So why the surge of narcissistic abuse? Why the surge of using narcissism? I think there's a lot of things going on. I think for one, and I'd love to know what you guys think, but I think we've become, as a culture, very aware of power inequity and power imbalances. I also think that oppression of any kind is problematic, and that we're really starting to realize that oppression can happen in the home, and it can happen between people who claim to love each other. That a lot of relationships are not that, they're not built or based on compassion. There's not a lot of sacrificial behavior for each other. There's a lot of, I would actually say, exploitation in some marriages, in some relationships, where one person does a whole lot for the relationship, where the other person tends to take a whole lot for the relationship. So I think we've become increasingly sensitive to power inequity. I think the other thing is that there's an increased awareness of, partly because of social media, of abuse. The fact that a lot of, I just recently heard Lisa Sonny, Stronger Than Before, do a video of here she's being physically abused, and she didn't know that she was being abused. Now, same for me. I was in that relationship for 3 years. I wouldn't have said I was being abused. Yeah, he was cheating rampantly, and I considered that hurtful, certainly betrayal. Yes, he was gaslighting me constantly. There was a deception. He was actually living a double life. But if you said to me, Kerry, are you being abused? I would have said, no. I mean, he's not nice to me. We have conflict. But then I would have said to you, well, all relationships take work. I didn't consider what I was going through abuse. So I think that we've become increasingly aware that abuse is like coercive control. Have you guys ever heard of the word coercive control? I never had until just a few years ago. We didn't even talk about marital coercion or sexual coercion, the fact that what is consent? We didn't even have good discussions. Somebody's talking about what happened at school, how when they got walked past, they got grabbed. We didn't. There was a like a prolifer, sort of this common thought that certain segments of the population were just to put up with not really good behavior. I spent most of my adult life feeling cornered by, getting cornered on the bus or cornered on the subway, people trying to brush up against me, grabbing my bra or slapping the backside of me. I mean, and we just saw that as, well, that's just people being people, boys being boys, or bullies being bullies. We never particularly talked about it as that's abuse and that's inappropriate. We shouldn't be treating each other that way. And I also think when coming out of this is just me theorizing, coming out of the agricultural uh, age where a farm, you depended on the farm to feed you, to feed your family. And that meant there was this extreme division of labor. There was somebody out in the field and somebody back at the house, somebody like making soap and doing the dishes and, doing the laundry, canning enough food for the winter, making sure the kids had enough clothes for the winter. All of this stuff kind of added up, and you had to have somebody else going out there and doing the same. We weren't really looking for companionship so much, but rather collaborative effort towards the good of the survival of the family. And then without us really realizing it, we kind of, I feel like things became more and more like traditional, seeing like certain types of people, certain genders needed to be doing certain types of work. Other types of work was too good for other people. We sort of have this oppressive, certainly patriarchal perspective of the world, and that added to that, so that then it became okay and acceptable, because if you're of a gender or of a race or culture that doesn't have the same levels of equity and power, then you're just not seen as deserving good treatment. So I think there's a lot of things that have come in together to make this kind of a place that we're at, where we now, though, we expect equality. And all parties are working hard. We're human. I think we're coming to see each other that we've not always respected the humanity of all groups of people, and that we're now coming to a place where we expect that, and as a result of it, then we're more quick to see abuse, whereas before we weren't. And we're also more quick to be aware of control and power inequities, whereas before we were focused more on survival. So that's a long kind of like, there's lots of things that come in. I don't think there's one reason why this has gotten popular. Of course, social media plays a big part of it. Of course, the fact that a lot of us have suffered very toxic relationships. We want to make sense of it. We want validation for what we went through. All of that, I think, then feeds into this as it makes it increasingly popular. Here's the thing, though. I know that some of us have gotten casual and used the term narcissist or narcissism or narcissistic abuse to describe selfishness, or to describe insensitivity, or to describe somebody who's conflictual. I've even heard people use gaslighting as a way to describe lying. Gaslighting always includes a lie, but not all lies is gaslighting. But I do think that because we want to call something out and say it needs to stop, it becomes easy for us to use a very language with that carries a lot of weight and a lot of meaning and a lot of negativity as a way to talk about it, instead of just talking about it in another way. I agree with you that narcissist is overused, but I also think there's a lot of narcissist. It's a great way for us to say something bad happened, or this person was selfish, or they were hurtful to me, or I was betrayed, or I felt like this person was hard to live with, when it isn't always an indication that we're actually in a relationship with a narcissist. But I do think there's a lot of toxic behavior that doesn't get called out, that's subtle and we miss, and needs to stop. So I feel like I'm kind of on both sides of the fence. I would love us to be more sensitive of how we use the term and not just casually toss it out of because that conversation didn't go the way that I like, or because that person isn't showing the way that I want, that therefore they're narcissistic. No, they're not. But I do think there are a lot of people who are in relationships with people who are being deceived, who are being treated very inhumanely, who are being regularly lied to and gaslit and criticized, who are being basically, yeah, back to the word deceived. They're being deceived and used. There's a lot of relationships where there's a lot of deception and disrespect. I would say disrespect of the other person's humanity and as a person, and that to me is abuse. So I want to propose, and this comes out. It was written in 2000 and I think 2018 maybe. It was written by Dr. Kristen Milstead, who wrote the book Why Can't I Just Leave? By the way, if you want a really good book at understanding the complexity that goes into the victim's mind about why they get caught in these relationships, why it's so hard, what causes the confusion, I can't recommend that book enough. I actually have her as a webinar replay. If you're interested in hearing her in an interview, it's an hour and a half long interview. I would definitely check out it on my website. You can purchase the access to that to be able to see it. It's very powerful. And also, if you join the club, it's part of the natural part of the club. You get the access to that webinar. But here's what Dr. Milstead proposed as a description of narcissistic abuse. And that is, I'm going to read this. It's a false reality created through an elaborate covert deception and psychological manipulation over a long period of time. She said it consists of these traits. It has to be a false reality that's based on deception. I'm going to start over. Let me start over okay. She said narcissistic abuse is the intentional construction of a false perception of someone else's reality by the abuser for the purpose of control. Let me restate that in a simpler way. So, it's not by narcissists necessarily. Anybody can do this. So there's a construction of a falsehood, so that for the other person. So the person thinks something is real that's not real, and it's done in order to manipulate that person. So let me give you some examples of how a deception could be created. It happens a lot of dating apps. So this is how it happens on dating apps. You meet somebody and they say, I want a long-term relationship because in your profile, it says you want a long-term relationship. So they come in saying, I want a long-term relationship too. And you're like, okay, that's really cool. And then you get into the relationship and you start to get to know this person, and they start to then, everything they say indicates they're not looking for a long-term relationship, they're looking for a hookup. Well, why did they do that? To get something from you. They did that in order to access something that they knew you weren't be willing to give to them unless they deceived you. That's a great example of narcissistic abuse. For a lot of you, it could be this person said to you, I want to have a relationship with you that's monogamous. I want to build a life with you. I've never loved anybody like I love you. I want to have a family together. Let's do this. It's a fantastic thing. And what you don't know is they'd never intend to be monogamous. And they also don't intend to actually love you, really sacrifice their life for you. And they're really selfish with their money. They don't intend to actually be equal partners. They actually want something. They want something from you. They want either the comfort you bring by offering the stability that you've created. Maybe they want you to provide the income. Maybe they're just looking for access, physical access to you. Maybe you happen to have a lot of power or influence, and they want that access to the people that you have access, or access to the things that you can access because of the connections you've built over your life. But it's a deception. They say they want one thing, they say they're about one thing, but they're not. That they're about something else. So it has all those pieces of it. And here's the other part that's so awful. They not only are deceiving you, they're also deceiving everyone around you. They'll say to everyone around you, yes, I'm in it for life. This is a person I want for the rest of my life. I've never loved anybody more. I can't wait to raise their kids together, blah, 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 all of this stuff. And they get everybody to buy in on this perception that this is what they're about, when it's not what they're about at all. They don't intend that at all. And that is exactly what happened to me. Mine promised me monogamy, promised me to be, he wanted this to be the one and forever relationship. I was the only one, and he wasn't in it for the money. And even though he knew I had life insurance, I mean, all these promises. And then I get into the relationship and I find out he's seeing tons of people. There's never been any monogamy at all to me, although he expects it from me. He's lying constantly. I don't even actually know what he did with his time. If we're not together, I have no idea what he's up to. And that he was after the money, absolutely after the money. I have a text message saying that he'd been after the money. So, he presented one thing, but it was actually something else. So maybe for you, it might be, here's one that I heard. It was awful. I know somebody where their partner said that they had a terminal illness and needed special treatment. And so the one that fell in love with them was like making their whole life about this person's treatment, what this terminal illness this individual had, only to find out all of it was false. There was no terminal illness. I don't even know what they were doing when this person went to the hospital. I don't know how they pulled that part off, but the whole thing had been a deception. And I'm sure all of you have stories about how you were deceived too. So I would like to propose this. I would like to propose that narcissistic abuse is a construction of a false reality in order to get you into a relationship so that you're vulnerable, so they can achieve to exploit an asset of yours, some asset of yours, money, influence, power, maybe access to you, whatever, good experience, something they want from you, and that it's a deception based on that, and that there are stages. There's 4 stages to it. There's the idealization or the love bombing. Then there is the devaluation, which then starts the gaslighting and criticism and all of that starts up. There at some point there's a discard. They may make it so that you discard them, or they may discard you. And then there's the effort to get you back at periodic times in order to somehow ensure that you're still emotionally hooked to them, or maybe because they want to extract more of the asset out of you, or because they want to torture you some more, but there's usually some kind of a hoovering that happens. And that's the cycle that a lot of victims find themselves in. Idealization, devaluation, discard, hoovering, breadcrumbing, and then they get back into the relationship again. It's awful. It's really awful. So here's the thing, I guess, before I start taking your questions today. I do think we need to be careful about saying everybody's a narcissist. We need to really think about, it's different. You can have a narcissistic trait. By the way, I have narcissistic traits. Sometimes I'm a little entitled. I know that. So it's different to say someone's having a narcissistic trait versus somebody's a narcissist. Be very careful. The only person that can actually technically diagnose are medical professions who have the license to diagnose. But that doesn't mean we can't call out narcissistic behavior. But I would say it's different than saying somebody's a narcissist. I could say something like, that's awfully narcissistic, but I'm not saying that person's a narcissist. We can differentiate the two as 2 different things. But I do think it's important for us that we need to become aware of what abuse is, that there's emotional abuse, there's physical abuse, sexual abuse, and of course, then there's also ambient abuse or coercive control, as well as narcissistic abuse. And I would say narcissistic abuse that differs, this is my opinion, I would say narcissistic abuse differs from the other in the sense that it's built on a deception that's created to exploit the victim, which is, if you think about domestic violence or psychological abuse, there isn't always a deception. You may know you're in a relationship with a moody person who loses it. They lose their cool and they go off and it just gets really nasty. That's, certainly psychological or emotional abuse, but that isn't a deception. Or you may have somebody who just, comes in on a Friday night after having a really bad week and loses it on the family. That's domestic violence. But there isn't a deception. Everybody knows this person's a hothead. And boy, when they get into drinking too much or the week doesn't go right, you need to be really careful. Keep your distance with the individual. That's different than narcissistic abuse. So I do think it's overused, but I also think, in a paradoxical way, our awareness of what narcissistic abuse is understood. It's not understood enough. This is so important to education and awareness, because when we do this, in my opinion, it's like helping people get out of very oppressive situation. when you didn't know that you're being somebody kind of watching, lording over you, watching your mileage, checking on your receipt, keeping you under the thumb, somebody who's has one rule for themselves and another rule for the family. Somebody that whenever that door opens, that you all in the family, your heart, you like take a breath, you catch your breath, and your stomach sinks. All of that. We need to stop that. I don't want to see us in those types of toxic, harmful, terrible relationships. We all deserve to be treated with respect and love, where we're safe to say what we feel and to express what we need. And I really want to truly see all of us get to that place. Oh, Anna, I'm so sorry to hear that. that See, that's a great example. Anne just shared that her person put a GPS tracker on her car while he was lying about cheating. See, that's called it's called reaction formation. That's different than projection. So projection is when you call it out on another person and saying, I think you're cheating. Where reaction formation is actually to sort of like say, I hate cheating. Cheating's wrong and nobody should cheat. It's a really bad thing. I think, and he's also projecting too. I think you're cheating, but cheating is really bad. I'm going to watch you because I can't trust you. Meanwhile, they're doing the very thing. Think of the televangelist who talks all about certain types of sins. And then when you find out they've been doing those sins, that's reaction formation. Projection is when you actually accuse another person of something that you're actually doing. But both of those are very primitive examples. All right, thank you so much for letting me do this awareness of this today. I'm going to start taking your questions or talking about whatever you'd like me to talk about. I also want to let you know that next week I will be going live on Tuesday at 4 p.m. Central Standard Time. We're going to be talking about trauma dumping. When is it trauma dumping? Why do survivors have this urgent kind of compulsion to retell what they went through? Is that trauma dumping? Is that wrong? Should we be calling it something else? What role does that play in a survivor's healing? So I'm going to get into that next week. I know it's something that all of us do. We talk a lot about it. There's reasons why we talk a lot about it. I want to explain the role retelling plays in healing and helping you. But I also do think there are people who never move beyond retelling. They get stuck in that place and they keep doing it over and over. So I want to talk about how to know when someone's stuck and maybe they need more help. And what might that indicate? And I also want to just normalize the fact that this is part of processing, which is a very, very it's part of PTSD. It's part of healing from something that's very, very traumatic. So I'm going to get into that next week, and I'm super excited about it. Something I feel really intensely about. Whenever somebody jumps on victims for that, I get really triggered. It's very upsetting to me. So, all right, questions for me. What would you guys like to know? Maybe it's something I talked about today. Maybe it's something I didn't talk about today, but I would love to know what your questions are that we can address. And I'm so thrilled that you guys are here with me, and I love doing it. And I've gotten into posting these on so that you know about them on TikTok. I don't know if you guys know that it's now an event. I'm making an event on TikTok so that you're aware of it. And I always post these things about usually Wednesday or Thursday on YouTube and Facebook. Okay, Emily wants to know, can I say anything about the body or somatic narcissist? I've never heard of that before, and I think maybe mine is. So a somatic narcissist is also sometimes called the sexual narcissist, but I think it's too narrow. I think the sexual narcissist is a subtype of the somatic narcissist. So somatic narcissist is a person who's preoccupied with their body. They're preoccupied with it could be a lots of ways. Think of the gym bro on steroids, the person who's like so preoccupied about having the right musculature, the right kind of tone, it's spending lots of money on, having all the certain kind of look. They're also think of the person who's hooked to plastic surgery, constantly having another procedure done. Nothing's ever perfect. They're constantly, like working on themselves and in an obsessed way in almost like again, think of the DSM-5 criteria. They're special. They need this. It's entitled. It lacks sympathy or sensitivity to anybody else. It's this excessive preoccupation. But here's the way it can also show up that we don't typically think of. It can be the persons who preoccupied with their illnesses. This is a person who perpetually has a problem. It almost feels like it's they're a hypochondriac, very aware of, what temperature they have or what kind of weather is outside or what they're putting in their body. There's this preoccupation with it. And excessive so. I mean, I do know that there are people, please, I'm not pathologizing people who are living with autoimmune diseases or allergies or all sorts of stuff that can certainly impact. Look at, though, here's how you can tell the difference. Is it a person who's trying to gain attention and uses it as a way of source of admiration or to separate themselves as somehow extra special because they do this? Or is this just part of their healthy lifestyle or a way of them showing good self-care? See, it gets really sensitive. We have to be very careful. Somebody's talking about themselves, how they've been doing a lot of self-improvement since they left that toxic relationship. Absolutely. That's very, very important to do this better self-care. But is it a person who's doing it in order to garner admiration, in order to be extra special, in order to, somebody else was, but who are you to judge that stuff? I'm not. Here's how I think of it, Tammy, and that's a really great question. I think of it is, do I want to be in a relationship with somebody who's excessively talking about their latest diet or the new food they found that has low carbs, or maybe that they're stressing about whether they got a new wrinkle on their face? I don't really want to be in a relationship with that. But that doesn't mean I'm also not supportive of somebody doing that. But I would want to know why. And I know you said, you're not talking to me. I get it. You're not talking to me. It comes down to about secondary gains. What's the purpose? What the person's purpose? Is it to avoid shame? Is it to is it out of insecurity? Is it out of compassion and respect for themselves? But so it can show up like around illnesses. It can show up around excessive focus on fitness. It can show up around excessive focus on plastic surgery or some plastic procedures. It can show up around, here's another one. It can show up around excessive focus on sex. So it could be somebody who's pursuing new relationships and new experiences, as somebody who's just looking for a challenge and then exploiting people in order to get that challenge. So it's not the behavior so much as the problem, it's the motive for the behavior. The motive for the behavior. So pay attention to what is the person gaining by doing what they're doing. You may have somebody who has incredible trauma and insecurity, and they feel that plastic surgery is a way for them to feel better about themselves. I get that. That makes sense. That's not looking for secondary gains of being seen as perfect or beautiful or a pick-me. You know what I'm saying? That's kind of how, yeah. I do think that's an interesting point that you're making, Estat. How many of them are sex addicts? I would say people who claim to be sex addicts, a lot of them are narcissists. I think there's a huge overlap. Are all sex addicts narcissists? I wouldn't go that far, but I do think a lot of them are. Emily, this is a good point. Thank you for saying that, Emily. Emily says, I'm getting the silent treatment from my narcissistic friend because I'm mirroring how she treats me. Okay, some advice about that. First of all, that's funny. I get it. How many, I bet you so many of us can super relate to what Emily is doing, where we feel like we think if the narcissist could just have a taste of what they're doing to me, then maybe they would stop doing it. Maybe they would understand how it feels and get a clue and realize how hurtful it is. It won't work. You won't, it's called modeling. What you're doing is a form of modeling. It actually won't kind of impact them and change them because their perspective is extremely self-referential. So what you're kind of hoping is they get cognitive empathy. Like, if you know what I'm going through, then why would you do it? But that never works that way because they don't learn that way. They don't see you as a person with your own rights, your own needs, your own feelings, your own drives. They see you as an asset, as a tool. So all they see it is you're withholding and you're being cruel, and that's not nice, and now they don't like you for it. They would never see themselves through the perspective of, the lens of themselves. That's what I do. I do that same thing. Maybe I shouldn't do that. They just don't learn that way. But I do understand it. Boy, did I feel that urge too. In fact, we call that, in the circle of narcissistic abuse, we call that fleas. that you lie down with dogs, you stand up with fleas, that we catch these bad habits from them. And I do think sometimes we do it just to give them the treatment back because we think they deserve it, or maybe because we want some retribution, maybe we think see it as a form of justice. But I also think sometimes we do it just because we get tired and we get cross and we just want to, we get tired of taking the high road all the time. I know I certainly did. I started picking up some bad habits as well when I was in that relationship. So I think it's a very common thing a lot of us experience, a lot of us do. I would suggest, and I saw several people saying this to you, is that it may be time for you to rethink the wisdom of this relationship. I I would suggest that do you need to be in this relationship? Why? If they're not respecting you and loving you and watching out for you and have your back, is it worth your time, effort, and your heart to be in to expose yourself to somebody who's that thoughtless? And thank you guys so much. I know that many of you have been gifting me and I haven't said anything, and I do really, really appreciate it. And I also know on YouTube I've got Obi Ham who's on today, who was one of my followers, and I'm so thrilled to see you here as well. Yeah, you said she brings horrible energy wherever she goes. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Others have said they've tried what you're doing, Emily, and it hasn't worked. So, yeah, determined even said they only see their behavior. They don't see your behavior. So, they'll just see that you're being hurtful and cruel. In fact, here's the other thing that mine used to do. If anything I confided in mine about, say that I was like had a something really vulnerable that I shared that may have been like, okay, what he was doing would be like a level 10 or 11 on a Richter scale. And what I did, what might have been a level 1, like a just slightly in the territory of it, maybe not the best thing, but so, nowhere near to the 10. And he would say that I was no better than him, that I was just as bad as him. So you watch out for that, because they don't see them, they always give themselves a pass and they never give you a pass, not ever. So be really, really careful. So somebody's saying their ex is in court telling the court system that they're not the stable one. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's very common. It's very common for here, and it makes sense. If you think about it this way, and this is thing that's super unfair about legal battles. If I could give you all big advice about a legal battle, this is what I would say to you. Your partner who has more of the toxic traits, more narcissistic traits, they're the one doing all the harm. And because they're doing the harm, they're not acting out, they're acting themselves. They're not reacting, they're acting like themselves. So they're not being triggered, they're in charge. They have the command of the room. So they come in looking together. They look good because they're in control. They're in charge. But the one being harmed and betrayed and backstabbed and shocked, surprise after surprise, you're being constantly triggered. So you're constantly reacting. So when the court system sees the two of you, they see this very calm, collected presenter who's actually the abusive one. They don't realize it. They just see this really great persona of somebody who's competent and in charge. And then they see this other person who's a mess, who's reactive, who's raging and angry, who's maybe even because of all the abuse, now they've got confusion. Maybe they're struggling with some executive functioning because they're forgetful and they're not on time, and maybe they're not even looking put together. And they look at these two people and they say, well, this person obviously is the problem because this person's so together. So here's my advice. And it's totally unfair. But when it comes to court, you have to view it like it's a presentation for a job, that you're applying for a job, and that you have to show up together, collected, and your best self all the time. You may say, well, how am I supposed to do that? Because I don't have the finances, I don't have the resources. I'm the one raising the kids, so I'm also the one trying to hold the court fort down because this other person just walked it out and left me with everything. I get it. I get it. I'm not saying it's easy, but I am saying remember that this is a stage. The court is a stage that you're on, and if you come in with heavy documentation, with heavy proof, you come in prepared and dressed like it's a stage, you're going to do better than you would be. So, Kelly, you got court tomorrow. Here's one thing I want you to do to prep for it. I want you today, If you don't know how, find some YouTube videos on how to do diaphragmatic breathing. Very easy. So you just put it into the search bar, diaphragmatic breathing. I want you to practice that today. Get really good at it. Tomorrow, before you even leave the car, I want you to get there a good 20 minutes early. Be there early. Press your dress, make sure you got your makeup on, you feel as good as you can in your body. And I want you, when you get in that car and you're there early, I want you to take 10 nice deep breaths. I want 10 nice deep breaths. And then I want you to pull yourself together, and I want you to walk in like you own that place. I don't care what you're feeling. I want you to act like you own that place. I want you to get in, sit down, meet your attorney or meet whoever you have to. Again, I want you to nice slowly breathe. Take 3 more deep breaths when you get into the courtroom. And then while you're listening to whatever's said that's upsetting, I want you to, again, keep taking deep breaths and realize I'm on stage. This is like an interview. This is about who can look calm and collected. I know I'm right, and I know I have my material ready, and you can do it. I'm rooting for you. I hope you'll come back next week and let us know how it goes. I really hope that you do that. And also, just stick to the facts. Stick to the facts. Stay calm. They're going to try to rattle you. That's part of the process. But stick to the facts and realize that the truth is on your side. So again, this is what Dr. Green in his book, The Law of Human Nature, says. All the world's a stage. All the world's a stage all the time. And so you play the part tomorrow. The part you're playing is calm, collected, cool, together woman who's been harmed, and you know you're right, and you know the truth is on your side. Can a psychiatric evaluation help you if you're being judged? I don't know. That's an area that's kind of, forensic psychology is a little outside of my expertise. Yeah, so I don't really know if that would help you or not. Yeah, Tammy says it helped her a lot. Yeah. S. Dot, I'm not even going to give that advice because I don't agree with your advice, but I don't suggest people do that. I do suggest that you be strategic, though. Definitely be strategic. And so Anne says, I wish I knew then what I know now. It would have saved me a lot of hurt. Yes, a lot of hurt and money. I agree. I also think you have to go in definitely rooting for yourself, not rooting for fairness. If this is it, you got to imagine you're going to war. And when you go in for war, you want to get as much as you can for as little as you possibly can. You're not going in for what's equitable. Those days are over. That's mediation. This is a person who doesn't play fair. So don't expect them to be any fairness. You go in asking for everything, and then maybe you'll get something in the middle. And I also really do truly believe that before you guys select attorneys, here's another advice about the whole process. Before you select an attorney, interview the attorneys and interview whether or not your attorney is possibly narcissistic. You don't want to hire a narcissistic attorney. They may be a shark and cutthroat, but they're also going to be cruel, and possibly crass to you. And they may not always be looking out for your best interest because they're looking out for their best interest. Remember, there's lots of different interests here. There's the interest of your partner who wants to get what they can get out of this, the most that they can. There's their attorney's interest. And then there's the judge's interest, the court's interest. Then there's your attorney's interest and your interest. So you want to find somebody who's going to approach this from your perspective as best that they can. Somebody who's going to really over-identify with you in a way and then root for you to the best that they can. And I think that takes interviewing people. And maybe it costs you money, I don't know. Maybe not all of them will give you a free consultation, but I definitely would look for referrals, ask around who's used whom, and find out whether or not this person has a good reputation and they've delivered for other people. And then I'd also then personally meet them and see what kind of feel you get for this individual. If you don't feel like they're hearing you, that you don't feel respected, if you feel insecure or minimized or shut down in that appointment, please don't hire them. Please don't hire them. You want somebody you feel safe, who's got your back. That's what you want. You want to know this person is somebody that you can depend on, not somebody just looking for billables. So, yeah. All right, you guys, this has been really rich hanging out with you all. I'm going to jump over to my toxic-free relationship club. I didn't talk about this. If you guys are really struggling healing and you've been maybe in several rounds of narcissistically abusive relationships, whether it's with your family or whether it's with maybe friends or you're seeing it with partners, please consider joining Healing Strong. It's a 12-week group coaching program that starts in August. There's a second group starting in September. It's 12 weeks. We work on things like getting over the guilt and letting go of potential, making peace with what really happened, how to find closure. How do you deal with all that anger? What do you do with the fact that that there is no closure or there's going to be no justice? What do you do with the grief and the rage you have over the grief? You're looking for a safe place with only 8 people, small group, live each week on Thursday afternoons. Lisa, Sunny, and I are co-hosting that. I've ran that group twice now, so actually 3 groups of it. It is amazing. Because here's what I know: the best healing happens in community. And the best healing happens with people who understand what you've gone through, who can validate, who can actually slow down and process your emotional reaction and help you to normalize what you went through. Have a safe place to be angry about it. If you're looking for that and you're struggling, please sign up for this 12-week group coaching program. We also offer installation plans. And if you ask me for something special, I could probably find a discount for you. So please check it out on it's in the link in my bio, and I also will make sure it's a link everywhere else. All right, you guys, I will see you next week. We're going to talk about trauma dumping. What is it? Is it fair to even say people trauma dump? Is it just an attack on victims, or is it not? So let's come back next week. We'll talk about it. I can't wait for us to get into that. All right, you guys, stay safe, stay sane. Be careful for those in the United States with the 4th of July weekend. Be careful with driving, be careful with the fireworks, but have a wonderful, safe holiday with you and your family and friends. And I'll see you guys next week. And love you and appreciate you so much. Bye-bye.